Yes, that's just introduce myself. Then you can go to the next. Yes, so at more than 2 billion lines of code, it's not an exaggeration to say that Google production environment might be one of the most complex integrated systems ever created. It's also like highly connected, which is a key enabler, but creates many challenges at scale. The systems that you may run be much smaller than that, but it probably depends on a lot of third-party code, external dependencies, and maybe a cloud platform or two. Even though this is a case study about Google and should not be applied to the latter, the challenges of scaling with complexity are universal. Next, please. So given this scale and complexity, one might raise the question, how do you run a planet scale system? How do you keep it stable? How do you add new functionality? Or what if everything goes wrong? Next slide. Let's look at balance. At one side, you have reliability, and on the other side, velocity. Reliability and velocity are often at odds with each other in the traditional software development model. Developers push for velocity to quickly launch new features, and ops push for reliability, and this might slow things down. This is inherent to the way the incentives structure are set up. But in reality, we need both aspects. We need reliability, and also we need to move faster. So how do we find the right balance to resolve this conflict? Next.
One second.
Yes. Lina?
For a second, once again, I lost it. I'll move on.
Should I just give a pause?
Lina, you need any help?
Yeah, Mr. Cloud file. 1 second, I'm downloading it again.
Okay. Yes. No, one back.
One back.
Back again. Yes, that one. So the way that we deal with this conflict is by sidestepping the problem and creating a discipline to balance the competing concerns of reliability and feature velocity. Ben Trenor, founder of SRE at Google, describes SRE what happens when you ask a software engineer to design and run operations. So SREs comes from different backgrounds. They have all mix of software engineering and system engineering backgrounds. We know how to build and how to run systems, and we deeply care about it. Next one, please. SRE focus on reliability to meet the availability targets our users need while maximizing long-term feature and velocity. SRE also focus on maintainability, ensuring that we aren't feeding the machines with human toil, where at Google, we define toil as work that's manual, repetitive, automatable, or gives no enduring value and grows linearly with the service growth. And of course, efficiency is also important for us. So we make sure that we use the engineering time and machinery resources as efficiently as possible. Next. SRE at Google is a central organization, and that takes care of many different areas, from user-facing products like search and YouTube to internal infrastructure like network or developers tools, which our users never interact directly. It has been tested, applied, and adapted to many different contexts. The overall organization is like thousands of SREs nowadays. Next, please. So Google SRE is grouped in product areas, each taking care of a related group of services, and typically has between 50 to 300 SREs. It partners with a developer organization that's typically much, much larger. And this asymmetry is intentional. It keeps SRE focus on what's the core mission, but also it means that we cannot offload all the operational work to SRE because it could easily overwhelm the teams. The important part is that SRE receives its headcount from its dev partner organization. So typically in the context of individual engagements. And these engagements, they happen like at a team level, but the engagement planning and funding is done at the product area level. Next slide. So SRE engagement, it's a peer relationship between an SRE and a dev team. It is typically scoped around a specific service or product and the relevant production assets or end-user interactions. Such engagement is not a one-way street. It requires significant contributions from both sides. A common misconception is that SRE only comes in after the service is implemented and launched. Actually, an SRE engagement can happen at any time in the service lifecycle, or even cover it from start to finish. Because each service is different, like it could be user-facing, internal, developer, and they have different needs. The types of engagements, they are diverse as well. I'll cover that a bit more in detail later. But however, what they all have in common is that it all scoped around SRE mission. That's reliability, velocity, maintainability, and efficient, and a shared set of principles. Next one. Yes, so these principles are called SRE Engagement Model, and it describes how the SRE and developers work together. Next. First, it's important to note that SRE support is not automatic at Google. SRE is a scarce resource by design. In fact, many services at Google are built and operated by the dev team with no SRE support. SRE teams are funded by dev. So it's the choice whether to invest in SRE or not. Once the developers, develop partners, they decided to invest in SRE, and this headcount is transferred, then it's the SRE organization responsibility for that headcount. Production excellence, it's like a multi-year investment. So engagements are not considered in isolation, but at the SRE product area level. Building an SRE team takes a minimum size, typically 2 sites with at least 6 SREs each, and time to build a deep understanding of the services. The service itself and its reliability is ultimately owned by the dev team. Even if the day-to-day production authority rests with SRE, responsibility for having a reliable service is not offloaded onto the SRE team. SRE job is to help the dev team to meet the reliability and velocity goals. Starting and continuing with an SRE engagement is a joint decision for dev and SRE. Both sides need to agree to start engagement. Either side can end the partnership, in a way that the dev cannot force a service on SRE, and SRE has to give it back when the devs wants it. It's important to understand that both sides are doing this because they want it. They recognize the value of the partnership. Next slide. So if SRE support is not universal, how do you decide what they should work on? First of all, it all needs to be aligned with the SRE mission. SRE is a specific role at Google and does very specific things. It also must have a clear value proposition. SRE should only take on work that SRE can do significantly more efficiently than anyone else. If the work can also be done by the dev team, it should be kept that way. That means more flexibility and less overhead. The work must be impactful, interesting, and challenging for the SRE team. There are circumstances where sometimes devs think that SRE support is just someone holding the pager. But SRE is not an ops team. Our mission is not to handle operations, but to improve the inherent reliability of the systems through engineering. So doing ops work, it's a means to an end. Understanding what breaks and how to fix it, but we want to fix it like once for all. Because ops is not a zero-sum game in a way. Instead of just moving operation responsibilities from one place to another, an SRE engagement should focus on reducing the overall ops. It's like a win for everyone. So overall, we aim at finding engineering opportunities that lead to sustained long-term value in terms of service health. And those are often not obvious to a typical engineer, but need like a specialist. Next. But now that we know what we're going to work on, how we make sure that we are successful. So think of managing a service as a shared endeavor. SRE and dev bring different expertise, but they work towards a common goal, the success of the service. To avoid conflicts, it's important to agree on what success means beforehand. SRE and dev maintain like a shared roadmap. The goals should be objectively measurable and actively tracked. This includes like regular reviews of service health and priority. We also use SLOs and error budgets as a standard technique for ensuring objectivity and balancing reliability and velocity. They promote a common understanding of reliability goals and a tool to measure success. Once we have achieved your defined goals, it's time to adjust investments. We always ask the question, is this still the most impactful area for the SRE to work on? Maybe we can engage with a new service. Maybe new topics have come up with this service. Maybe the scope has expanded and we need more headcount. Or sometimes it just doesn't work out. For whatever reason it is, and depending on the situation, we might want to double down on the investment or just change the SRE focus for a different topic. Whatever happens, engagements and their funding should be like revealed regularly. Headcount should always stay and be allocated where they do the most impact. Next one. For an SRE, there is always more to do than there is time. So it's critical to focus on what matters the most. Engagement should be scoped to a set of service with clear correlation and boundaries. You cannot boil the ocean. SREs that don't work on production health just for the sake of engineering merit. They are advocate for the users and for the user experience. They look at reliability end-to-end and with the customer-centric SLOs. However, there are also infrastructure improvements that may not be directly visible to the users, but converging towards a standardized production platforms help you move faster. It reduces the costs of implementing horizontals, operating services, and move them between teams. Cognitive load as well for needing like to have many different tools and architectures, it's a major bottleneck for SRE teams to scale. Next. Now that we kind of learned the core principles, let's just jump in and how to apply them in practice. Next one. So, as I said earlier, SRE can engage any phase of the service lifecycle. We all have seen how important it is to integrate testing, security, and other topics early in the software development lifecycle to like shift left. The same applies to reliability. During the design and implementation, you make so many decisions that are incredibly hard or practically impossible to change later. Architecture, technology, failover capabilities, and so on. So when a production expert has a voice at the table, you can fix these problems before they happen. Next one. We categorize our engagements in 3 broad buckets. We have the baseline, the assisted, and the full. They require different levels of commitment, not only in terms of headcount funding for the SRE team, but also in terms of project time invested by the dev team. Compliance with the best practice and coordination overhead between the teams. High is not always better. Engagement can transition from baseline to assisted to full support eventually, but not all services do. It depends on the business priority and the need for the SRE involvement. Service can also transition back to one engagement type with a lower commitment, sometimes because they don't meet a bar for the SRE support anymore, or sometimes just because they're mature enough that the SRE can be scaled back. Next. So let's start with the baseline. Baseline is the entry-level engagement that we have. It's tactical and reactive. It's open to everyone in the scope of a given SRE team. It's included in the price of funding the SRE team, and it consists of ad hoc support, for example, office hours and consulting projects. It provides easy access to production expertise, but the execution lies with the devs. It can also apply to incident response. SRE could provide an escalation on call for dev on calls to ask for help during a major outage. The SRE might not have the daily knowledge about the particular service, but they can often help with generic production knowledge. Additionally, they can handle escalations to backend dependencies or communication with stakeholders and allow the dev on call to focus on debugging and mitigation. Next one. So one example that we have and one possible way to implement the baseline is what we call the SRE Love. It's a program for time box consulting projects, typically like 2 to 4 hours a week during like a specific amount of time, usually a quarter. The developers submit a proposal and someone from the SRE team helps them to execute it. The focus here is to transfer the knowledge, not the SRE to deliver the project for the dev. It helps to improve the productionization early in the life cycle of the services, and that do not have any other type of SRE support. It also often the first time that the dev team interacts with SRE. So it helps to build this relationship between both sides. The devs gain a better understanding of what SRE can do for them, and the SRE learn about the new service that might become relevant to them at any point in the future. Next. Next up is the assisted engagement. This type provides a long-term strategic engagement. There's a dedicated point of contact on the SRE side, and a shared roadmap is defined. The focus is on engineering projects that improve production health. It can be included co-work or redesign work, infrastructure migrations, and many other things. It usually does not include operations. The service is still operated by the dev team. Sometimes individual SREs might join the dev rotation to gain a deep understanding, but still the dev owns it. When this type of engagement is applied at the right time, it can provide a huge value that pays off for years to come. Next. So one example for assist engagement is embedded SRE. Typically, one or two SREs join the dev team for a particular project. They're still part of the SRE organization and the SRE team and participate on the main on-call rotation, but they spend all the project time with the dev team. As this is a significant investment, it is reserved for truly critical projects and for situations where this SREs can be a force multiplier for the dev team. For example, it can be used to apply SRE principles during the design and implementation of a major new service, or it's used to prepare the onboarding of the service into a full support tier. Next. And then we have the full support. That's the most expensive type of engagement. It requires a substantial headcount investment and continuous contributions from the dev team. The service will need to meet a high bar of production excellence, and SRE becomes an effective owner of the production. The most obvious attribute is that SRE is on call for the service, but the goal isn't to keep like a broken service afloat with on-call heroics. So any straightforward issue can be fixed much more efficiently in assistant engagement. Once the low-hanging fruits has been dealt with, the SRE on-call work provides additional comprehension necessary to solve less obvious, more complex problems. So both sides should work together towards a simplification to reduce the cost of operating the service, up to a point where neither side cares who carries the pager. Next. So one example is the SRE mantra of automating yourself out of the job every 18 months. So our goal is to automate ourselves out of the jobs. And that can be done through, I think you changed the slide? Yeah, that one. And that can be done through incremental improvements to the service infrastructure or pivotal changes to a new approach. Either way, it requires like intimate understanding of the service, which is typically built through day-to-day involvement in production and engineering. The goal is to reduce the need for continuous SRE involvement to make more time for exciting projects. In some cases, like handing back the service to the devs just by moving by different type of engagement. It is essential to reduce the cost of complex high-touch systems before they grow out of control and become something that we call like haunted graveyards. At the time of the investment, both for operations and project work, it's high. The full support should be reserved for mature services and only business critical systems. But even those, there is typically plenty of opportunity for improvement. Next. But what do we do when everything goes wrong? If the operational load gets too much, if the service is like too unstable, and SRE devs start having a lot of conflicts, or the devs are just like disengaged. So we don't panic. We apply the best practice for incident management to this strategic level. We don't fight the symptoms. We try to understand the root cause to prevent the recurrence of this problem. And to come up with this plan, usually we have to get a buy-in from the dev partners and all the critical dependencies. If there is enough engineering time available to execute, we just ask a senior leadership to declare that the work required to fix this problem trumps all other project work. That's what we call like the code yellow. If we cannot agree, we just escalate up on both sides of the management chain. If that doesn't help, perhaps it's time to disengage. So it also helps to remember the engagement principles. It's a shared endeavor. We must set a reasonable scope and adjust investment when needed. We have to invest in the relationship between dev and SRE. We have to spend more time together because united, we're going to stand, but if we divided, we're just going to fall. Next. So let's just wrap up. Next one. So Google SRE is a specialist organization that takes a principled approach to balance reliability and velocity while keeping maintainability and efficiency in mind. They partner with dev teams to solve hard engineering problems that would be a lot more difficult for devs on their own. They do not work against each other, but they work towards a shared goal. SRE help devs to build the production muscle. The collaboration should begin early in the life cycle. Each of those engagements is different, and we pick the approach that fits the needs of the service the best. But they all share the same principles. And because the service, the business, and outside factors are constant changing, the engagements needs to be adopted and regularly to stay impactful. Next one. Yes, so just to finalize, we always like to engage with people outside. So if you have anything that you did that's you try out and worked for you, we would like to know it. And also if you have any requests for us to topics that you would like to hear about SRE, just enter either sre.google or cloud.google.com/SRE. Check it out if it's not already there. And if it's not, you can always ask us. And finally, if you want to connect with me, you can always drop me a message or just find me on LinkedIn. Next slide. We have a lot of free content that can be found online and you can read for free. So take a look and feel free to drop me a message as well. Next one. That's it. Sorry for a bit of the rush. It's just because we kind of using too much time. So I had to rush a bit. But thank you so much for listening.